in the show.
Great. Got it.
And I'm going to hand it to Michelle.
Well, Nancy, why don't you introduce yourself first? That way I don't dominate the conversation at the very beginning. So just tell a little bit about your history at Leading Age.
Sure. As Sarah mentioned, I'm the Vice President of State and Affiliate Partnerships at Leading Age National. And I've been with Leading Age National for roughly 21 years, working in the member relations area and more predominantly in state relations. I'm the liaison to our 38 state partners. And then I'm also the liaison to a few of our larger members around the country. And prior to that, I worked at the Leading Age New York affiliate, and I was their director of housing policy. So I have a history where all of you live. Michelle.
Great. And what, if you guys didn't catch that, just what that job means is that Nancy has to fly a lot to see all of these. Can you imagine having all those affiliate members that you're trying to manage? Nancy, you have done an incredible job. I've known Nancy for years, maybe a decade or more. And her dedication to the members and to the affiliates is just astonishing. And I hope they appreciate you at Leading Age National. So, because they probably don't ever get to see you because you're probably always out looking, talking to the states.
Yeah, I fly a lot.
I see that Glenda's here. Glenda is from National Church Residences, and she lives, or she runs the region where you live, right? You're in New York. So, all right, well, let's get started. So, and I want to second what Sarah said. This is as much to be about a dialogue as anything, and would love to see anybody who wants to be bold enough to turn on their cameras. We'd love to see your face too. So, all right, so the conversation today that we were talking about having is about mission work in times of crisis. So I can see that there are a variety of folks on this call. And so one of the things I want to try to make sure is that we think about this from, you know, the different perspectives, whether it's you are somebody who is sitting at a single site and that is all there is your community, or you're part of a regional group. And so you may be somebody in charge of a region, or you may be somebody like Nancy and I, who are what you would call corporate people. And so we are looking at a different perspective. So I want to start by saying everybody's perspective is so important and so critical, and they get even more so during times of crises. And so the topic today is about mission work in times of crises. So we know that what's true is that we cannot protect ourselves from crises. They are not something that we bring upon ourselves in almost every situation. They are things that happen to us, to our community, to our organization, or what have you. So the question is, how do you respond? And I would suggest, and I guess I should say that I've been at National Church Residences for 28 years. And so I've had my opportunity to experience and watch a response from a mission-oriented organization. I also have spent a lot of time working with groups like Leading Age and also places like NAMA, which is an organization that represents for-profit and nonprofit. I know some amazing for-profit groups, but I will suggest that there is a differentiator between the nonprofit response to crises because of who we are and how we end up working. And I'll get to those differentiators here in a little bit. But let's start by talking about what kind of crises are we talking about. So I've kind of put these into 4 buckets. And again, 2 of these are ones that would be universal, and then 2 will be more unique to organizations that are bigger. So the first one is what I would call natural site crises. And I will give you an example. Just one that's happened to us recently in 2021. We had a building that it was a high-rise building that had a fire. And this fire happened to happen in February of 2021. So think back, that was beginning of vaccine era in COVID land. So everything for the last 2 years for me kind of gets defined as somewhere in the COVID land. So here we are in the middle of COVID before we had a lot of vaccines. We had a building had a fire, high rise. We had to evacuate every one of the residents. It was that significant of a fire. So we're trying to evacuate our residents into hotels during COVID and get them the care they needed during a crisis of a fire. So that would be one that I would call a site, a natural site crisis. The second one is one that some of you may have been on a call with me before because it happened at one of our communities in Maryland just last year. And that was one of the worst unnatural crises that I've seen in my lifetime here at National Church Residences. And that is when we had what I would call a ramped up or spiraled up resident who was upset about something at the community, went to his apartment and got a gun and came back to the community and shot and killed our assistant manager and our service coordinator. I will tell you that Leading Age Maryland, Leading Age National, unbelievable response to support us in that time. And we can go into some of the other issues about response as we move along. The third one is what I would call a regional crisis. And a regional crisis is one where it doesn't happen necessarily at the site, but these are what I would call often now climate related situations. And I can give you 3 that have happened to us in the last probably 15 years. The first one was Katrina. We have a series of buildings in the New Orleans and Baton Rouge areas. And so Katrina hit big time for us. That was 2005. 2018, if you'll excuse the expression, but I would call it Hurricane Hell. That is when we had multiple hurricanes impacting the United States in a very short amount of time, from Texas all the way through Georgia, Florida, and then into Puerto Rico. And then the last one was in 2021, where we had the Texas freeze. And that also affected a group of our communities. So regional things that happen that I consider at this point are unique situations that are coming through climate issues. And then last is what I would call the national crisis of COVID. For us as an organization, it was never a time when every single one of our 340 communities were impacted at the exact same time with a crisis. So it just changed crisis responses to a whole nother level. And I will hopefully say that never again in my career, I hope will we ever have a situation like that again. So those are the 4, I'm sorry, that I think we can look at and say, what is common about those? What can we take away from that would say, these are kind of some rules of thumb or some things that we could think about no matter what those crises are. So if you don't mind, I'd like to turn this over to Nancy to talk a little bit about her perspective on one of those situations. Nancy?
Yes, thank you, Michelle. Yeah, I'm going to talk a bit about what happened with Hurricane Maria. I'm sure all of you remember when that hit Puerto Rico, and I was honored to be one of the tour group that went down there. I went with Michelle, with Roberto Muniz, who is our chair-elect of Leading Age and who works for the Parker Health Group in New Jersey, and a videographer that National Church Residences brought so that we could capture this incredible experience. And we were so fortunate. We had Roberto's nephew, Omar, driving us around Puerto Rico, which was really an experience in itself. Now, Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico in the area of Yacaboa on, September 20th, 2017. And at times there were 215-mile-an-hour winds, really amazing. The most intense hurricane activity actually lasted for 13 straight hours. And You know, when you think of the hurricanes that we have in the US, very seldom is the duration that long. Now, our trip took place 82 days after Hurricane Maria, and we saw a wide range of damage by locale. The hotels were primarily filled with contractors and workers. There were no tourists. Most of the stores were closed. So, I'm going to give you a little snapshot of 4 of the members that we visited while we were in Puerto Rico. And the first one is Villa Providencia. How did I do, Michelle?
Yep, that's right.
75 units, 100% Section 8 subsidy. And they went 2 months without electricity. Trees were down, the substation toppled on its side, and 50% of their front rooms were flooded. They had no refrigeration, no elevators, and this is a 5-story building, and no water. They were very cash dependent, which is a theme that we heard repeatedly as we visited our members, and they had been told by the municipality that in the pecking order of emergency response, hospitals would get the nod over senior housing. So it was 4 days before FEMA even delivered food and registered the residents for aid. So they were highly dependent on residents' families, churches, charities, agencies, etc., to sustain themselves. Magda, the property manager, she stayed with her mom when the storm hit, but returned as soon as possible. And at the point that we were there, she still had no electricity in her home. Natalie, who was the resident service coordinator, her parents lost their house. She couldn't connect with them for 2 weeks to even assure that they were safe. So our next visit was to Torre Jesus Sanchez Eraso. And here we have 100 units, 107 residents, and 11 floors. Annabelle stayed at the property working 43 straight hours after the storm. We just were so amazed by the story of his commitment. He carried residents up and down stairs because there was no elevator available. Imagine that, 11 floors. And he did this for 43 straight hours. At his home, as of the time of our visit, he still didn't have electricity. Our next stop was Villa Esperanza, and this site had a 300-gallon tank that lasted for 4 days. But even with that, they were having a hard time keeping it filled because they needed cash in order to buy the diesel fuel. So the administrator's husband had been literally pooling their cash for several days. This is their personal money, anticipating the hit of the hurricane so that they would have enough money of their personal finances to be able to buy fuel for cash for the community. Maria, the assistant manager there, left her home and 3 children after 3 days to return to the community. At the point in time that we were there, personally, she had no water and no electricity. They had a beautiful gazebo outside that was completely destroyed. We saw before and after pictures, and there was no sign that it was ever even there. And lastly, I'd like to profile Santiago Fajardo Village, 57 residents, a 5-story building. There was no cash withdrawal possible for quite a while, and the gas stations that the staff patronizes gave priority and didn't charge them temporarily. What a response is that? They went for 2 months without elevators. Volunteers, resident families, her family, and local community members, they all pitched in for the cleanup and even served meals to the residents. Maria, the resident service coordinator there, her home sustained extensive damage and she had no electricity as of the time of our visit. She had wished that they had better means of communication. We did hear this from one of our other visits, as they recognized the need to have a satellite phone because once the phone service was down and the internet was down, they felt completely cut off.
Mhm.
They were doing manual paperwork, and all of you know what that means, processing for 2.5 months. Fortunately, they got an extension from HUD and some assistance from National Church Residences Corporate. But looking back at the profile that I just described to you, to me, it's just amazing, the resilience and commitment of the staff of these communities. And I think, 2 months without water, without electricity, can you just even imagine for a second what that would be like in the US? We get impatient when our power goes down for a couple of hours. And their resilience and willingness to pitch in and help each other is really a story of mission and commitment and quite honestly, love that they were able to pull together and raise all boats. So I'll go back to Michelle.
Thank you for sharing all those stories, Nancy. It really was an incredible trip, and it was a delight to do it with you and Roberto. What a fun what a fun experience in a weird kind of way, wasn't it? So ironically, the weird thing was we went to Puerto Rico, and this is just a side note, but then I think it was just a month later, I was supposed to go on a cruise with my whole family. It was a family reunion. So we ended up docking in Puerto Rico. And what was striking was the way they had put all the money like immediately into trying to get the cruise ship area ready for the cruise lines, where the rest of the island was still without power. So you just really saw how also like this inequity that kind of rose in terms of the overall response versus what our organization and Leading Age was able to do, which was really make sure that the residents that were least served were really getting the resources they needed. Another quick story about that during that Puerto Rico time, the ingenuity that is required, because they literally went to, as Nancy mentioned, a cash-based society in a hot second. So you weren't allowed to withdraw more than, I think, $1,000 at a time from any ATM. So if you could find an ATM that was working, you could only take out $1,000. You could not use charge cards. So to buy petro, like for our generators, it was virtually impossible because, as Nancy mentioned, it was like $2,500 at least just to fill one tank if you could find the funds. So we ended up working with Volunteers of America to this is crazy, so don't ever tell anybody you heard this from us, but we got $10,000 cash and we sent it to VOA, and Volunteers of America took our $10,000 of cash and their $10,000 of cash and gave it to an asset manager who put it in a briefcase and flew himself over to Puerto Rico in order to meet our managers to give them enough cash to buy the petro that was needed to power the generators to keep the residents' food and medicines chilled. So that is creativity and resilience in ways that is hard to even begin to understand, and how that really works when you put everybody together. So I thought, what can we learn from all this? So I think that's really the big question, is that these are very unique situations, right? Pandemic, once in 100 years, we hope. Hurricanes, well, we had the big one of what I would call the trifectas was 2018. Prior to that, the one that knocked our socks off was 2005. There were a lot of things in between, but these things are very episodic. So you can't set up a response team that stays on guard all the time for these episodic situations. So what does that mean? Is if that crisis happens, how do you respond quickly and I would say also efficiently? So our organization has taken to really understand the value of a convening. When you have a crisis, I would say one of the most important things is to create a task force or a committee I don't like committee as much because they tend to connote much more of a standing organizational entity, where a task force is a hot minute, it has a period of time, it has a leader or a designated leaders, and it also tends to be not in a specific area. It tends to be something that goes across disciplines. So this is something that we have seen over and over again, is the value of a convening group. So we have set it up now that we have become more formalized in saying that convening group has to have certain number of representatives in it. And so we have actually set it up with a group that we call the table. And that table, I wish I had a screenshot I was hoping to share with you. But essentially, that table has to include representatives of the following. Number one is absolutely your on the ground representatives. So whether that's a regional leader, or it might be the manager or whoever, but somebody who is really on the ground, who can take enough time to message to the rest of us what's happening on the ground. The second thing is, obviously you need your PR team. The public relations team is there to try to help ensure that there is a point around media, so that it doesn't get chaotic or you don't have too many people trying to say different things. And also to be often turn something that is absolutely a tragedy, but also be able to highlight the human interest and inspirational stories that happen, so that the crisis itself is seen as best as possible in elevating the response, not the crisis itself. There's obviously things like your insurance. Somebody needs to be there, especially when it's a property situation. Your insurance and risk people need to be there. Your legal people need to have a presence there, and a variety of other folks. I'm happy to share that list later, Sarah, like our little diagram that we use, that kind of says this is all the interests that need to be represented at that table. But it's a very disciplined approach to say we need a representative, and those folks commit to being there. So that's the second part of a convening, is the commitment that you're going to show up on a specific every single day for a specific time, no matter what else is on your plate. So you clear your plate for everything else. So that's the number two, is that those folks really make a commitment that this is the highest priority in their current work life, because otherwise you will miss things if people start showing up ad hocly. Who convenes it? Really, again, it depends on the size of your organization. If you're an organization that is a single site organization, whether it's a CCRC or a single site affordable housing community, you still need to have somebody who is the acting facilitator, somebody who calls the meeting, somebody who is given the authority to make decisions quickly, because you're trying to make a lot of decisions in a very short amount of time. This can't be a thing like you rule by committee where everybody goes back and then comes back a week later. You're trying to say in like the next 12 hours until we meet again, this is what's been decided. So no matter, again, your size of your organization, obviously the bigger the organization, the more it's important to ensure that you've got multiple. The size of the group becomes bigger, but that's not really the important thing. It's the importance of the mentalities. Who's representing risk management, who's representing the operations, who's representing your legal interest, et cetera, et cetera. So those are kind of some of the things that we have learned, is the discipline of the convening to respond quickly and on time to whatever that type of crisis is. So with that, I'm going to turn to what I would call the mission differentiators. So we've got this all in place. Yes,
Michelle,
please.
can I ask a question about the table, the task force that you all have? Do you ever meet before a crisis were to happen for any pre-work that is done within that group? Or is it really just a group that is formed immediately upon a crisis happening?
Oh, such a great question, Sarah. And I would love to say we meet as a group beforehand so that we can like continue to hone things in. It's more like we meet during the crisis and a debrief after the crisis. But the reason for us is that each crisis is going to have the representatives will be different every single time. So let me give you a great example. If I have a crisis in like that fire that was up in Michigan, a lot of the different people who need to be at that table, they represent the same discipline, but I'm going to have different people compared to, because especially that affects my affordable housing communities. And so my leadership team in affordable housing is a different leadership team than the leadership team that runs my CCRC campuses. So I have the same representatives, I mean, in terms of discipline, but I'm going to have different people. So because we're a bigger organization, I can't have like the same people that are always the ones that are going to be around the table. So I have to be more about who is representing for this particular crisis, my the senior people that are representing that can make the decisions around resources, who's representing the legal side. Again, very different teams, because I might have a legal counsel whose expertise in affordable housing versus somebody who's got an expertise in our senior living side. Does that help?
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much. Does anybody else have any questions? I don't see any questions in the chat, but any other questions around this task force, the table? I love the name of that. But any other questions?
Yeah, good morning, Sarah and Michelle and all. This is Brandon. This is Brandon from CSI. How you doing this morning?
Hi, Brandon. How are you?
Good. How are you? I'm enjoying this. Thank you.
Great. Good to see you. Well, sort of see you.
Yeah, so see. You know what? I'll turn my camera on in a second.
I'm calling you out, Brandon. I'm calling you.
You
out.
are. You're totally calling me out. It's a long story, but I'll jump on with the camera for the next question. Well, Sarah kind of stole my initial question. I was curious. I know you're not convening the task force ahead of time, but do you all have like some kind of a written protocol, like with these basic steps in them, so that whoever is the convener kind of, oh, here's a playbook for when there's a major crisis, like start working on these steps?
Yes, we do. And it's, I would say, we've got all these, like this history, right? But I will tell you that playbook has just been recently done. So we have put something together that is what I would call kind of the cheat sheet for whoever the convener is, because your point is it is a great question. We don't have the same convener every single time. I have been the convener sometimes, but other people have been that convener other times. So we want this to be agnostic to whoever the leader is, because different times it'll be different people.
Right. That was, and so my follow-up question is, can you share that with us?
That's a great question. I think I can share it as long as I give a disclaimer. So I have to going back to my legal folks and say, what do I need to put on there to say this is just an internal document? We can't, but I'm sure we can send something out.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. I hope my next question.
All right. Anybody else have a question? All right. Well, then let's go to what I would call mission differentiators. So I will tell you that convening a task force could be done by any organization. And as a matter of fact, I would suggest that, our for-profit peers would be doing very much the same thing. So what makes the mission response different? And this is where I would say, why am I here 28 years at National Church Residences? It's because of things like our mission responses to so many things, whether it be crisis or not. So I'll give you a couple of one, and a lot of this you're going to hear a tremendous bias I have to service coordination. I think service coordination is one of the most amazing gifts that we have as an organization. I'm very thankful to the Department of Housing and Urban Development for creating and seeding and funding service coordination for over 25 years. Correct, Nancy? And of course, I would say we all need to continue to be advocates to say we need more money for service coordination. But that's my advocacy hat on, so I'll leave that off for today. So I'm going to talk about a couple things. One is a mission differentiator that came up in both our response to Katrina and our response to the hurricane trifecta, which happened in 2018. And that's what I would call pop-up virtual service coordination. That's a different way of saying what we did is created a hurricane hotline. And we were able to use our service coordinators that were all over the country and actually use them and kind of deploy them in a virtual support role to help folks that were in need of support, that were seniors, whether they were our seniors or other people's seniors. I will share with you that that was partially funded by Leading Age National. So Nancy, I don't know if you want to talk at all about that hotline. I know I've just caught you off guard, but if you wanted to, I'd be happy to let you share your perspective on it.
Well, the first time we established the hotline was with Hurricane Katrina, which really, I mean, that threw us a major curve. We had never, as an organization, at least under the leadership of Larry Minix, which is, you know, when I started working with them, experienced anything so devastating to our membership. And in terms of the hotline, we figured that that we served 1,000 people just through the hotline that we established. And fortunately, we already had an 800 number that we normally used for membership inquiries. So what we did is essentially publish that and shifted the use of it so that we had something already established that people could just immediately start using. And it's that quick action response, I think, that makes the huge difference.
Right, right. The quick action response for sure. And so often we agree, we had like a tracking system around those hotline calls. And what we found was just so many people, especially Katrina, needed housing, and they needed both short-term housing and permanent housing. We ended up placing folks around the country who actually literally moved from New Orleans and set up permanent residence in either Texas or Ohio, Georgia, and folks that literally just moved into those communities and stayed there. There's other folks obviously who moved back into their own homes. So I would say that's a great example of a mission resource that we have because we're a nonprofit housing provider that has worked with this program for a very long time. We have over 200 service coordinators in our family alone. And then we also oversee 200 other around 200 service coordinators for other people. The value of service coordinators, I see that we have some service coordinators on here. So I feel a little bit shy about like saying something because I'm not one, but I just can tell you how much over the years I have seen that is a mission plus that shows up in so many ways that if you're let's just say you're a senior housing provider in for-profit, you probably don't have access to those dollars. Or unfortunately, the tax credit program, we still have not figured out a way to provide service coordination if you're senior housing and tax credit, which is very, very frustrating. So the value of service coordinators on a bigger scale where they can collaborate and create something like a hotline, or on a site level where they can really be involved in the response team is unbelievable. It's just how it's like the DNA of service coordinators to just pitch in and do whatever they need to do. Another example of that is our Gateway community. When our service coordinator was killed at Gateway, can you imagine? Can you just imagine how hard that was for everybody, the residents, the staff that remained, the other service coordinators? And yet for weeks and weeks, we had service coordinators from and around the area, all the way to, I think, Pittsburgh, that would drive in and spend a day or a couple days in our community room, just providing service coordination for our residents, and even during this time of incredible mourning and tragedy at the site. So service coordinators are, to me, a mission plus that is just unbelievable in housing. Another mission differentiator would be, I would say, the tight-knit community of affordable housing providers that often, or not just affordable housing, but housing providers, senior housing providers that often gather at tables like this. When we get to know each other in places like this, if something happens, I know that I'm going to get multiple phone calls from leading age members who will say, how can I help? So I would say the housing networks are an incredible mission differentiator. And the last one that many of you may have as a resource is what I would call the chaplain program. We have expanded our chaplaincy program. We had it originally in our hospice programs, as well as some of our CCRC campuses. We have, over the last 5 years, launched an initiative to try to provide chaplains resources in affordable housing. That's a long story that I won't get into today, but what I will tell you is, again, when our Gateway tragedy happened, our chaplain resources that came to bear and provide resources and support at that community were amazing. And it wasn't just ours. We had chaplains that came in from Volunteers of America and from several other local churches. Because we are a faith-based organization, we were able to have our corporate chaplain connect with chaplaincy services and bring those very needed programs and resources to Gateway for weeks and I think months. Again, it's a value, the mission value or the mission differentiator. So we have 15 minutes left. What I'd like to do is close my comments up with some lessons, some very quick lessons learned. Turn it over to Nancy for some final remarks and leave some time for questions. So very quick lessons learned. So I'll go back to the convening as well as those values. The first one is the lesson of practicing the discipline of convening. In the middle of a tragedy, somebody needs to be a convener to organize people. You want to, because here's what happens. Everyone wants to help. The bigger your organization, the more you'll have people come out and say, what can I do? What can I do? I want to help. And left to our own devices, we will just start getting in each other's way. And so that's the one thing we don't want to do. And I will tell you, I've seen it over and over in our organization. Something happens, like let's go back to our fire, the fire in Michigan. I had somebody from our philanthropy team call and say, what can we do to help? Somebody from our chaplaincy say, what can we do to help? Somebody from our service coordination team say, what can we do to help? Somebody from our operations side say, what can I do to help? And they're all calling the same person. And God love them. Oh, and our PR team saying, what can we do to help? It's lovely. We all wanted to help, but the operations team needed to figure out how to relocate over 100 residents. They didn't need to be answering 20 phone calls. So we have to figure out a better way to convene so that we are being the organized support team for the people that are really doing the hard work, which is the folks on the ground. So remembering always that corporate is support. And I don't care if your corporate is sitting in the back office of a CCRC, that's still your corporate. And so thinking through, how do we work to be truly the support team, not the team like issuing commands, and listening to those that are most impacted. Nancy shared the stories that we heard from Puerto Rico. We really needed to hear those to know how to most help. Because it's the hardships that we're like, oh gosh, I didn't even think about that. I didn't even think about a sat phone. Never thought about that until that happened. And I'm like, of course, they were having to drive an hour to find a cell signal just to check in with corporate. So those are so really thinking through how to be listening to those most impacted. And I'll end with two other ones. Number one is the right people on the bus. when you do get a group of people that are saying, we want to be the folks that are in that task force for this time, you want the folks that are most dedicated, that can be the people who make good decisions and really commit to that. And then I'll say the last one is the value of partnerships. Nancy and I have been talking a lot about the partnership that we've had. That's a personal partnership as well as an organizational partnership. National Church Residences enjoys two really amazing ways that we do partnerships. One is through our associations and the other through our philanthropic partners. Both cases, I have seen them step up in amazing ways in every one of these situations. I can't go through them all today, but I can tell you it's heartwarming to see the kind of response you can get from both your association partners and your philanthropic partners during times of crisis. So look inside your organization deep for the people that can make a difference in the time of crisis that just show up at your doorstep. You didn't call for it, it just showed up. And then the second is look outside your own organization and ask for help from the partners that have been ongoing partners for a long time, like Leading Age. And with that, I'll turn it to Nancy to have some final comments before we open it up.
Sure. Thank you, Michelle. Yeah, over the time that I've been at Leading Age, we've had a number of, unfortunate to say, disasters that have occurred, and we have responded, having that foundation of knowledge that we learned with Hurricane Katrina in August of 2005. I'm going to focus on just 5 of them and just give you some snapshots. These are the 5 big ones during my tenure. And of course, first one being Katrina. We established back then a spreadsheet. And what we did with this spreadsheet is match the needs of our members with members that were offering assistance. So we had a constant tracking of who needed what where, and we were trying to make the connections. In coordination with our 38 state partners, we also assembled a list of links to individual state support sites so that they had information at their fingertips. We determined an appropriate protocol of how to best deploy our group purchasing program. Back then it was Med Assets that was a part of Value First, and how could they send supplies as simple as a Barco lounger from one end of the country to the other to be able to accommodate a new resident that was moving from one community to the next. And of course, we developed the National Hurricane Relief Fund, first time we ever did that, and raised over $1 million. In October 2012, we had Hurricane Sandy. I'm sure anybody on the East Coast well remembers that. It impacted several East Coast states, and a huge number of our members, their staff, their families of residents, etc., suffered losses. We raised $102,000 for Hurricane Sandy relief. And for the first time, with the lessons learned from Katrina, we deployed some of that funding to actually some of the staff of our members who had lost their homes, who were experiencing, losses that are incomprehensible, even to the extent of lack of food as well as housing. So, we were getting better at this, unfortunately, but just trying to meet the needs. And going to Hurricane Maria, we raised $150,000 in cash. Now, I didn't fly it down in a plane in cash, but I did bring the checks when Michelle and I went to Puerto Rico. And that was enough responsibility for me to handle, to be honestly. In November of 2017, we had the California wildfires, especially in the Napa Valley. At PEP Housing, the mother of a housing member's resident service coordinator passed away in that fire. And we had the opportunity to meet with her. And I had the opportunity to deliver $45,000 in checks with Melanie Ripley, who is the membership staff person at Leading Age California. And of course, March 2020, a month that's embedded in all of our minds. And when the pandemic hit, we initially conducted massive outreach to our members. people on the Leading Age team called literally every member that we had an interrelationship with to take a pulse, see what they were experiencing, and try and fill that need that they expressed as quickly as possible. We initiated daily calls with members. Ruth Katz could be an NPR
She could.
personality. She has a voice and a persona, and she assembled content 7 days a week for those calls. And to say that she could not wait for every call is not an exaggeration. She was all in, and I think all of you felt that out there. We had efforts to obtain as much PPE as we possibly could, get it out there to the members, again, engaging value first in any possible way. We established, as you were establishing units for positive cases, we were going to CMS and to HUD and trying to get waivers on your behalf so that you could do what you just needed to do, in the state of emergency. In the state of New York, where I'm from, the governor sent people from hospitals to the nursing homes, and none of them were prepared. The hospitals had PPE, the hospitals had infection control protocols. Our housing members did not, our nursing home members did not. And there was this influx of COVID spread in New York that we tried desperately to manage. We also produced the pandemic playbook, which to this day is updated on a weekly basis. We keep very up to the minute information on that because unfortunately, it's still a little piece of our lives. So we try and keep the information fresh to help you. And as you know, we still have those calls Mondays and Wednesdays, 3:30 p.m. Eastern, and I'm sure some of you join as many as you can. So the partnership that we enjoy with National Church Residences, and we certainly extend to all of you, and just want you to know that we're there for you.
Thank you, Nancy. So I'm going to just to close this out. I'm hoping to share my screen to show you a very quick clip that this is from Puerto Rico, but this is in 2020. So remember, they've gone through the whole hurricane thing, and then they end up having COVID like right after that. Whoops. Sorry, you have to listen to the commercial for a second. Don't you hate that? All right, there we go. So this is our staff serenading the entire building. They have beautiful voices. Who knew, again, that they were able to stand out in the courtyard and provide this beautiful, true blessing to the residents by singing to them in the middle of COVID. So it is amazing what happens when we put everybody together and work through crises. So I think with that, Sarah, I think we're done with our remarks.
Yes, thank you both so much. I'm really grateful, particularly for the specific examples that both of you gave today. Thank you so much for highlighting those. I am so grateful to be a part of Leading Age here in Maryland, but also Leading Age National and being colleagues with all of you. So thank you so much for the experiences that you've all had, the expertise that you brought to the conversation today. Would love to, there are no questions in the chat, but we have got 4 minutes left. So plenty of time for somebody to unmute and ask a question.
I don't have a question, but I'd love to at least point out, hi, Brandon, that Cheryl Tucker, who is an amazing, amazing person, who has been with all of us. She is from Gateway. I just would love to have all of you guys just know that she's on this call And Cheryl, thank you so much for everything that you did and have continued to do on behalf of Gateway.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Brandon, what's up, man?
Good morning again. I got the camera on for you.
All right.
I actually did have some questions, but they're pretty kind of like operational in nature. But I figured I might as well throw them out there while we're doing it. I had two questions. One is going back to convening the team. I was thinking about the fire in Michigan. One of the things you said I thought was really interesting, because we had a big fire at a site as well, was you didn't want all the people who were trying to help kind of getting in the way of the operations team trying to actually manage the crisis. So I was curious, like the team that's kind of managing this whole thing, would you recommend that be kind of a corporate level person who's not in the day-to-day to kind of bring all these people together? Or would it make more sense for that on-site person who's kind of managing everything to be that point person, since they kind of know everything that's going on?
Yeah. Again, I'm guess I'm going to speak from an organization that's larger. So because we have a lot of segments where you have subject matter expertise. We don't have necessarily somebody who's wearing 5 hats. Everybody seems to be having their own specific hat. So what we found is that the folks that are really dealing with the actual crisis, the folks on the ground, don't have time to be talking to everybody. They don't have time to talk to our insurance risk manager, and they don't have time to talk to 4 agencies that want to do an investigation into whether there was a problem with our fire code, and they don't, right? So we need to keep that noise away from them so that they can do the work that they've got to do, which is managing the residents, managing all the relocation, any resources that come in that show up from like when we send a whole bunch of stuff over to them. So keeping them away from all that noise really for us required a corporate facilitator, but having them on the call every single time. So they knew there was one time a day that they had to check in, tell us everything they needed, anything that was a problem that they needed help with. And so they could get it off their desk.
All right. Okay, good. That's actually what I was thinking. Thank you.
And I don't know, Cheryl, if you have any insights, including ones where we didn't do a very good job of it, but you were part of that task force, right? There you go. Thanks, Cheryl. So there was a lot of noise. Oh, got it. Cheryl's mic is not working, but there was, as you can imagine, on a tragedy like Gateway, there was a lot of noise, and including we had investigations from the state agency, HUD. We had HUD Asset Management headquarters calling me for 2 things. One, to ask questions, and then second is to ask how they could help. So, I mean, it was really, even getting HUD headquarters to call and say, how can we be helpful to you guys, was pretty amazing. But we didn't need that kind of noise when Cheryl and her team were trying to work on supporting the residents and the staff that were remaining. Thank you, Cheryl, for that comment. Sarah, back to you.
Great. It's 10 o'clock. Thank you so much again, all of you, for joining us today. I hope everybody has a great rest of the day. Again, if you have any questions that you're curious about or you think about after this call, please feel free to email me. I will be glad to forward them over to Michelle and Nancy, and we can get back to you. But thank you all so much for joining us, and I hope everybody has a great rest of the day.
Thank you all.